Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat at the far end, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening to the cadence of voices that never once paused to invite her in. It wasn't that she didn't know the material. She studied every line, every diagram, every weather chart the instructors had tossed across their desks. But the laughter, the low, mocking laughter, had a way of reminding her that sometimes silence wasn't strength, it was survival. "Ma'am, I think you're lost. The Girl Scouts meeting is down the hall." The words landed with a sting sharper than the Georgia sun burning outside the concrete walls of the sniper training facility. A ripple of laughter broke across the room, careless, thoughtless, designed to make her smaller than she already was. Staff Sergeant Isabella adjusted her service cap, her expression carved from stone, the green of her eyes steady and unflinching. She let them laugh. She had learned early on that mockery was only dangerous if you let it see you bleed. She was 22, 5'4" in her combat boots, on the surface ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about her presence, nothing ordinary about the way she carried herself, as if every step had been measured, every breath accounted for. The others didn't see it. They saw the short frame, the quiet voice, the way she rarely pushed herself into a conversation. They didn't see the summers spent in a small Texas town, where an old Marine sniper had taught his granddaughter how to steady a rifle on a fence post, while cicadas screamed in the evening heat. Her grandfather's voice still lived in her ears. "It's not about the gun, not even about the target. It's about everything in between: the wind, the air, the patience. You don't fight the shot. You learn to respect it." Respect. That word had carried her through basic, through deployment, through the night she watched two friends fall because someone 2,000 yards away had been faster, sharper, colder. That night had changed her. Not because of the blood, not because of the silence that came after, but because she had sworn silently, fiercely, that no one in her unit would ever again be left unprotected by distance. She would become the shield no one else could see coming. But becoming that shield meant enduring this room. The instructors, the smirks, the names whispered like weapons: Barbie, diversity recruit, step stool soldier. Every insult was a weight added to the rucksack already strapped to her back, and she carried it without complaint because that was how she had been raised. Keep your head down. Do the work. Let the actions speak. The Fort Benning sniper program wasn't built to accommodate her. It wasn't built for anyone like her at all. Out of 32 trainees, she was the only woman. And not just the only woman, the smallest, the youngest, the one everyone had already written off before she pulled the trigger on day one. She remembered that first week with painful clarity. They handed her a rifle they knew was faulty, the scope loose, the action stiff. When her grouping scattered, they shook their heads with mock pity. "Guess she's more suited for admin work." She didn't answer. She just cleaned the rifle longer than anyone else, adjusted what she could, and the next morning she shot groupings with a broken weapon than half the men did with perfect ones. It didn't change their laughter, but it changed something inside her. A spark. The tiniest flame of knowing. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Nights when she sat on her bunk staring at the compass her grandfather had carried through Vietnam, a small circle of worn metal, dented on the edges, its needle still sharp as if pointing her somewhere she couldn't yet see. She'd rub her thumb over the cool surface and hear his voice again, calm and low. "Precision saves lives. It's not about glory. It's about making sure the man beside you gets to go home." But what about when no one believed in you? What about when the men beside you laughed instead of trusted? That question gnawed at her during the endless runs, during the heavy packs, during the push-ups in mud that caked under her fingernails. They sprinted past her, jeering, calling out that the program was being watered down, that standards were slipping just to give her a chance. Each insult was a brick, and she carried them stacked high on her shoulders, waiting for the day when she could finally set them down with a shot that spoke louder than all their words. She didn't have to wait long. It was week 3 when Sergeant First Class Mitchell gathered them around the map. His eyes skimmed across the room but landed, deliberately, on her. He had been the loudest voice of doubt since the first morning, the one who called her experiment instead of soldier. And now, His smirk widened as he tapped a finger on a ridge line no one had ever been asked to consider. 4,020 yards, he said, his voice carrying in the heavy Georgia air. That's the distance from this ridge to that steel plate, 2.5 miles. For context, most of you won't even touch a shot past 1,200, and no woman has ever hit anything beyond 2,500 under combat conditions. The silence was immediate. Heads turned. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. Others grinned, sensing blood in the water. Mitchell let it hang there, the impossibility of it, the sheer arrogance of daring anyone to try. Then he dropped the bait. Hit that target and I'll give you an automatic pass to advanced. My personal recommendation. Fail and, well, I suppose we'll all go back to reality. His eyes flicked to Isabella, narrowing. That is, assuming our diversity recruit here even makes it that far. The laughter erupted again this time. She felt her stomach twist, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she lifted her chin just slightly, met his gaze without flinching, and asked in a voice quiet enough to force them to listen. When do we try? No one laughed then. That night when the barracks had gone quiet, Isabella sat alone, the compass turning in her palm. She thought about calling her mother again, the way she had a week earlier when the weight of it all felt too heavy. She had confessed then about the humiliation, the exhaustion, the fear that maybe they were right. Her mother had been silent for a long moment, and Isabella almost thought the line had gone dead. Then came the words she would carry like armor. Your grandfather never told you about the day he saved 37 Marines with a single shot, 1,800 yards. He said it wasn't about the record, it was about the lives he protected. Baby, he'd be proud of you. Don't let them take that away. Isabella had closed her eyes then, remembering the way her grandfather's hands had steadied hers on the rifle stock when she was just a girl. The patience in his voice, the endless afternoons when he taught her to watch the wind through grass instead of through instruments. She realized, sitting there in the dim barracks light, that this wasn't about a number. It wasn't about humiliating Mitchell or proving herself to men who would never give her respect freely. It was about something quieter, something heavier, carrying not only her grandfather's legacy, but the weight of every woman told she wasn't enough. The challenge spread across the base like fire. Officers whispered. Trainees placed bets. Even the base newspaper caught wind. What had begun as an insult was turning into a spectacle, and in the center of it stood Isabella, silent, steady, calculating every variable she could find. She studied weather charts until her eyes blurred. She memorized ballistics tables until the numbers became part of her breathing. She ran wind patterns in her head the way other soldiers replayed football scores. She knew this shot would require compensating for a bullet drop of nearly 40 feet, for a wind that could change directions 3 times along its path, for the rotation of the earth itself. It was science, yes, but more than that it was belief. And yet doubt lingered, the kind that crept in when the lights went out, when her body ached too much to sleep. Could she really do it? Could she carry the weight of every expectation, every sneer, every unspoken hope from women who might never even know her name? She gripped the compass. Her grandfather had told her that shooting wasn't about certainty. It was about trust, trusting yourself, trusting the moment, trusting that when the time came, the world would still itself long enough for you to breathe and let go. As the days ticked down to the attempt, she felt the air around her change. Some soldiers began to watch her differently, curious, almost respectful. Others doubled down on their jokes, unwilling to admit they might be wrong. And through it all, Isabella moved like a shadow, training, calculating, breathing. Because the truth was, she wasn't just preparing for a shot. She was preparing to answer a question that had haunted her since that first night in Afghanistan. When the people around you laugh, when they tell you you're not enough, when the world itself seems set against you, what do? Do you fold? Or do you lift the rifle, steady your breath, and take the shot anyway? What happens when the tool you rely on most suddenly fails? 3 days before the attempt, Isabella learned the answer in a way that made even her steady hands tremble. She had been on the range, sighting in at 1200, rehearsing the mechanics that had become ritual: breathing, squeeze, follow through. The crack of the rifle echoed across the field, dust rising from the berms. Then suddenly her vision blurred. She blinked, reset, tried again. The reticle of her scope shivered and fractured like glass about to break. She pulled back, checked, adjusted. The scope had shifted, completely useless. The replacement wouldn't arrive for at least a week, longer if the paperwork stalled, which meant the choice was hers: postpone the attempt or walk away. Sergeant Mitchell, predictably, didn't waste a moment. He leaned against the observation post rail, arms crossed, his smirk razor-sharp. "Guess that's that. You gave it a shot. No shame in admitting it was never realistic." His tone softened, but only on the surface. "You can bow out now with some dignity." The word dignity struck her like a slap. That was the easy exit, the trap wrapped in false kindness. He wanted her to quit. He wanted the spectacle to fade, the story to die before it ever lived. But dignity, she thought, wasn't found in walking away. It was found in carrying forward even when no one thought you could. She remembered her grandfather's weathered voice, almost amused. "Scopes are a luxury. Eyes are what matter. You don't learn the world through glass. You learn it by feeling the air shift against your skin." So she nodded once, silent, and said, "I'll be ready." For 3 days she abandoned the crutch of optics. She studied the sky, the tree line, the flags rippling faintly against the August wind. She walked the ridge and let the heat sting her cheeks, learning how sound carried, how a breeze at ground level meant something different 50 feet up. She shot with iron sights, forcing herself to translate environment into instinct. Each bullet wasn't just practice. It was a promise that she wouldn't let anything, not even broken equipment, rob her of this chance. At night, when the barracks finally went still, she cleaned the rifle until it gleamed in the fluorescent light. Her hands moved the way her grandfathers had taught her when she was barely tall enough to balance the stock on a fence rail. Wipe, oil, reassemble. Every motion calmed her, carved away the edges of doubt. Yet when she lay down at last, exhaustion pressing heavy, the doubts crept back. What if she failed? What if all the whispers, the jokes, the laughter proved right? Would she be remembered only as the girl who tried too hard, reached too far? Her chest tightened at the thought, but then she would reach for the compass. Cool, steady, unmoving, the needle pointing true, and she would whisper into the darkness, not about glory, not about records, about the lives you protect. By the morning of the attempt, Fort Benning buzzed like a hive. Word had spread farther than she'd imagined. Officers she'd never met leaned against trucks, their arms crossed, waiting. Reporters from the base newspaper huddled with notepads. Trainees from other programs whispered and pointed, their curiosity brimming with equal parts doubt and awe. It wasn't just an exercise anymore. It was an event. And Isabella was its unwilling center. The air that morning was strangely still, almost reverent. A light crosswind curled from the southeast, barely enough to stir the dust. She logged it in her mind, measuring the impact over distance. At 2.5 miles, even a whisper of air became a shout by the time a bullet reached its end. She moved to the line, her rifle cradled carefully. The chatter dimmed. The crowd held its breath. From somewhere behind, Mitchell's voice carried, smug and sure, "Whenever you're ready, Sergeant." She lowered herself prone, elbows digging into the earth. The world narrowed to the weight of the rifle, the steady pulse in her ears. She closed her eyes, one breath, then another. She remembered her grandfather's voice again, not as lecture but as prayer. "Respect the shot, respect the silence. When the world stills, you'll know." Her cheek pressed to the stock. Her fingers curled along the trigger guard. Through iron sights, the target was nothing but a shimmer, invisible to all but faith. 17 seconds. That's how long the bullet would fly if she got it right. 17 seconds where doubt could live or die. She inhaled. The world held its breath with her. She exhaled halfway, finding the gap between heartbeats, that thin slice of eternity where time seemed to pause. And she squeezed. The rifle thundered, the sound rolling like storm clouds. The recoil surged against her shoulder. Then silence. 17 seconds. The crowd didn't move. Eyes strained toward the horizon to a target no one could see. Even Mitchell had gone still, his smirk frozen halfway, waiting. 8 seconds. Isabella lay steady, face against the earth, feeling the vibration hum through her bones. 13 seconds. A flutter of doubt rose like smoke. Had she miscalculated? Had the wind shifted? 17. A voice rang out from the observer's scope. Loud, clear, final. Direct hit, dead center. For a heartbeat, the world refused to move. Silence clung stubbornly to the field. Then, eruption. Cheers split the air, bodies surged forward, voices shouting her name, her rank, disbelief and admiration mixing in a thunderous wave. Isabella didn't move. Not yet. She pressed her hand flat to the earth, grounding herself, letting the noise wash past. It wasn't about them. Not about Mitchell, not about the colonel, not about the reporters scribbling furiously into their pads. It was about the promise she'd made 2 years ago, in a dusty Afghan valley, when two friends had fallen, and she'd sworn no one else would. She rose slowly, slinging the rifle against her shoulder, the compass pressing cool against her chest pocket. Mitchell approached, his face pale, his voice hushed. He extended his hand, an offering she hadn't expected. "I was wrong about you," he said. For the first time, the words weren't barbed. They were raw, honest. "That was the finest shot I've seen in 23 years. She shook his hand, but her eyes drifted past him, toward the horizon where the target had fallen. Because in her mind, it wasn't a plate of steel. It was a promise kept. That evening, her phone rang. Her mother's voice broke the moment the news slipped through. "Your grandfather, he'd be so proud, so proud." Tears threaded the words, and Isabella closed her eyes, letting them soak into the silence. The base newspaper would run the headline. Fellow soldiers would clap her on the back. But for Isabella, the victory was quieter. It was in the absence of laughter, the end of whispers, the space she had carved out where there had been none before. Yet as the barracks went dark and her body ached from the weight of the day, Isabella found herself staring at the ceiling, the compass resting in her palm. She wondered, had she done enough? Was one shot enough to silence doubt? Or would tomorrow bring new laughter, new whispers, new battles to fight? The thought lingered heavy as she drifted into uneasy sleep. Because in the military, respect wasn't a trophy you won once. It was a war you fought every day. And Isabella knew her war was only beginning. What happens after you make history? The question haunted Isabella in ways she hadn't expected. She thought the shot would silence them, the laughter, the jokes, the careless dismissal. She thought maybe, for once, they would finally see her. But the truth was harsher. Respect in the military didn't arrive with a single bullet. It wasn't won in 17 seconds of flight across 2.5 miles. Respect had to be defended every single day. The morning after, Isabella woke before dawn, her body still heavy with fatigue, her mind still replaying the sound of the observer's voice, direct hit, dead center. She had expected celebration, maybe even acceptance. Instead, the mess hall went quiet as she entered. Heads turned, eyes lingered, but no one spoke. A few nodded. Some avoided her gaze. And then slowly the conversations resumed, but softer, guarded, as though she had become something alien. Not one of them, not anymore. That was the strange truth of achievement. It lifted you, yes, but it also isolated you. Isabella sat alone, the tin tray cooling in front of her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She just felt the familiar ache of being set apart, the weight of standing on ground no one else dared to walk. And part of her wondered if this was how her grandfather had felt all those years ago, after that shot in Vietnam. Celebrated on paper, but carrying a silence that no one else could enter. Later that week, she was summoned to divisional headquarters. The colonel himself wanted to see her. She stood at attention, her uniform crisp, her rifle left in the armory as regulations demanded. The colonel studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then finally he said, "That shot, it won't just stay in record books. It'll travel, it'll inspire. But you need to understand something, Sergeant. You've opened a door, and once a door like that opens, there's no shutting it again." His words were not warning, not praise, something heavier, a truth. That evening she called her mother again. The connection crackled, her mother's voice soft with pride. But Isabella didn't talk about the shot. She asked about the ranch, about the fields of sunburned grass, about the sound of cicadas at night. She asked because she needed to remember a place where she was not a record holder, not a headline, not an anomaly. Just a granddaughter, barefoot in the dirt, learning to breathe steady. The next deployment orders came faster than she expected. Afghanistan again. Convoy security, overwatch missions, long nights in forward operating bases where dust crept into every seam of her gear. This time she wasn't underestimated. This time she was watched. Every move measured, every shot anticipated, as though the weight of 4,020 yards followed her into every valley, every rooftop, every mountain pass. But history didn't protect you. Bullets didn't care about records. One night, perched on the crumbled edge of a ruined building, her rifle trained on Isabella felt the pressure like a stone in her chest. The men around her whispered her name in awe, but beneath their awe was expectation. If she could hit steel at 2.5 miles, then surely no enemy within sight would ever stand a chance. She tightened her grip, scanning the horizon. She thought of her friends, the ones she had lost before sniper school, the ones who now depended on her eyes, her trigger, her breath. She remembered her grandfather's words again. It's not about the shot. It's about the lives you protect. But protection wasn't perfect. The burst alive with muzzle flashes. Fire rained down, pinning her unit behind shattered walls. Isabella exhaled, firing, dropping one, then another, her body moving on instinct. But there were too many. Bullets sang through the air, cutting stone to dust. A soldier beside her, barely 19, his face still soft with youth, shouted over the chaos. "You've got this, right? You're the one, the record holder." His voice cracked, desperate, hopeful, as though she were a myth instead of flesh and blood. Her heart seized, because she wasn't a myth. She was a soldier, human, fallible. And that night, for every enemy she dropped, another seemed to rise. For every friend who survived, another bled. When the firefight finally broke, when the silence fell heavy as ash, Isabella sat in the rubble, her hands trembling. 3 soldiers had been carried away on stretchers, alive but broken. She had done everything she could. She had made shots no one else could. And still, it hadn't been enough. Back at base, whispers followed. Not the mocking laughter of sniper school, but something worse, the murmurs of expectation unmet. She should have stopped them all. If anyone could, it was her. Maybe she's not what they say she is. Isabella carried those whispers the way she had once carried jokes. But this time, they dug deeper, because she had wanted to believe them too. She had wanted to be the myth, the shield, the savior. And now she was learning that even myths bleed. That night she cleaned her rifle in silence. She thought of her grandfather again, the way he had never spoken of his record, the way he had carried silence heavier than metals. Maybe he had known this feeling, the truth that no matter how far your bullet traveled, it could never reach everyone. For the first time, Isabella felt something fracture inside, a doubt that wasn't about her skill but about her purpose. If she couldn't save them all, what did it mean? The compass lay in her palm, cold, steady. She turned it over, the needle swinging north as though mocking her uncertainty. She whispered into the darkness, barely audible even to herself, "Am I enough?" The barracks stayed silent. The world didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this question would follow her, through every mission, every bullet, every breath. Because proving herself with a single shot was one thing, living with the weight of that shot, the weight of expectation, was something far more brutal. And Isabella was just beginning to learn what that burden truly cost, What happens when the legend they build around you becomes heavier than the weapon you carry? Isabella felt it every day, like an invisible weight pressing between her shoulders. The shot at Fort Benning had followed her across oceans, across deployments, across the desert sands of Afghanistan. It wasn't just history now. It was expectation. She could hear it in the whispers, the way younger soldiers glanced at her as if she carried some invisible shield, the way commanders mentioned her name with an edge of certainty, as if simply assigning her to Overwatch guaranteed survival. She became more than a soldier in their eyes. She became the myth. But myths aren't made of flesh and bone. She learned that on a mission outside Kandahar, a convoy stretched thin across an open desert road. Isabella was perched high on a jagged slope, her rifle balanced against the stone, her eyes scanning a valley that seemed too quiet. Her instincts told her something was wrong, a silence that felt staged, unnatural. The unit below joked lightly as they mounted up, their voices floating into the calms. One soldier laughed. "We've got the record breaker watching our backs. Nothing touches us today." Isabella closed her eyes for a second, pressing her cheek against the stock. That kind of faith was a blessing and a curse, because if she was watching their backs, then what happened if something slipped past? What happened if she blinked? The first shot came from the opposite. She caught the glint of metal a half-second too late. A Humvee's windshield shattered and the convoy scattered like ants under fire. Isabella exhaled, adjusting, tracking the shooter, and with one squeeze silenced him. Another rose, then another. Her world narrowed into rhythm. Inhale, adjust, squeeze, repeat. But even as she worked, her stomach twisted. For every man she struck down, two more muzzle flashes lit the rocks. The air turned into chaos, dust rising, radios crackling with frantic calls for cover. "Sniper, East Ridge," someone shouted, but their voices carried fear, not trust. The faith from earlier was gone. By the end, when the gunfire finally faded, 3 soldiers lay wounded, their blood soaking into desert sand. Alive, yes, but changed forever. And Isabella felt something cold settle inside her chest. Later, in the silence of the makeshift medical tent, one of the younger soldiers stared at her, pale, shaking, a bandage wrapped tight across his leg. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I thought you'd stop them all." It was a knife. Simple words, but sharper than any blade. She didn't answer. She couldn't, because she had thought the same thing. That night, while the others slept fitfully, Isabella sat alone under the vast Afghan sky. The stars burned cold above her, countless, unreachable. She held her grandfather's compass in her palm, the needle steady even as everything inside her wavered. She wanted to call her mother. She wanted to hear that voice again, reminding her that pride could coexist with failure, that humanity wasn't erased by mistakes. But the sat phone lay heavy and unused. What could she say? That she wasn't the myth, that she wasn't enough. Instead, she whispered into the wind, a confession carried nowhere. "I can't save them all." The words hurt. They tasted like surrender. But somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice rose, one that sounded almost like her grandfather. It was never about saving them all. It was about saving who you could. Still, the doubt lingered. Weeks passed. Missions blurred into each other. She became sharper, faster, colder. The laughter of sniper school seemed like another life, a simpler battle. Here, the enemy didn't laugh. They hid, they struck, they vanished. And every time she set her sights, she wondered, was she still Isabella, the girl from Texas with a steady eye and a quiet heart? Or was she becoming something else entirely? One night, her unit moved into a village rumored to house insurgent scouts. The air was thick with tension, women pulling children inside, shutters slamming shut. Isabella positioned herself on a rooftop, scanning narrow alleys where shadows moved too quickly. Hours passed, sweat beaded her back, and then movement, a figure slipping into position with a launcher balanced on his shoulder. Her finger tightened. But then she saw it. A boy, no older than 12, darting into the same alley barefoot, chasing a ball that had rolled into the dust. The man with the launcher froze, torn between his target and the sudden child in his path. Isabella's heart thundered. One pull, that was all it would take. One pull and she would stop him, but at what cost? She thought of her grandfather again. Respect the shot. Respect what it means. Her breath faltered. Her mind raced. She was not the myth now. She was a woman holding life and death in the curve of her finger. And for the first time since Fort Benning, she hesitated. The boy stumbled, scooped up the ball, and darted back toward a doorway. The man raised the launcher again. Isabella fired. The shot cracked the night, the body dropped, and silence swallowed the alley. Her teammates cheered into the comms, their relief spilling out in sharp laughter. But Isabella lowered her rifle slowly, her hands trembling, not from the kill, but from the hesitation. What if she had waited too long? What if the boy hadn't moved in time? Back at base, she stared at her reflection in a shard of broken mirror. The eyes staring back were the same shade of green, but harder now, ringed with shadows. She whispered to herself almost in defiance, "You can't be a myth, you have to be human, or you'll lose yourself." But in the days that followed, she realized something cruel. To everyone else, she was the myth. They didn't see the hesitation. They didn't see the doubt. They only saw the impossible shot, the woman who had proven every sneer wrong. She carried both truths, the myth and the human, and the war between them threatened to break her. And yet in her quiet moments she understood something new. The myth could inspire, the human could endure, but only if she never let one erase the other. Still, the question lingered. How long could she carry both before the weight crushed her entirely? How many times can a soldier carry the weight before something inside finally breaks? Isabella asked herself that question more often now, in the quiet moments no one else noticed. When the missions blurred together, when the desert wind whispered through ruined villages, when silence pressed harder than gunfire. The myth followed her everywhere. The record-breaking shot had become her shadow. Soldiers whispered it like a prayer before patrols, commanders leaned on it like a guarantee, enemies sought her like a challenge. And Isabella, she carried it day after day, even when her shoulders felt bent beneath its weight. But myths don't cry at night, soldiers do. She sat one evening in the dim light of a forward operating base, the hum of generators filling the air. Around her, laughter rose from a card game, the smell of coffee and sweat mingling, soldiers clinging to small comforts. Isabella sat apart, her back against the sandbags, cleaning her rifle with slow, methodical strokes. Her hands worked, but her mind drifted. The boy, the one in the alley. She still saw him sometimes, darting barefoot through her scope, the ball clutched in his hands, his life dangling on the hesitation of her breath. What if she had fired too soon? What if she had fired too late? The compass rested against her chest, warm from her skin. She pulled it free, rolling it in her palm. Its needle pointed steady, unbothered, unbroken. She wondered if she would ever feel as steady again. Her thoughts were broken by a sudden voice. Private, young, fresh from training, his uniform still too stiff. He crouched beside her, nervous but eager. "Ma'am, is it true you hit 4,000 yards, like dead center?" Isabella glanced at him. His eyes were wide, shining with admiration, with belief. Belief so strong it almost hurt to look at. She gave the smallest nod. Grinned, shaking his head in wonder. "That's insane. You're like untouchable. I mean, if you're watching us, we're good, right? Nothing can get through." The word struck deep. Untouchable. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him about the firefight that left 3 soldiers bleeding, about the weight of expectations she couldn't always meet, about the boy in the alley. But she didn't. She simply gave him a thin smile and went back to her rifle. Because sometimes silence was easier than truth. The mission came 2 days later. A suspected insurgent leader. A village on the edge of nowhere, where mud walls hid rifles and shadows carried secrets. Isabella's team was tasked with overwatch, protect the entry, cover the advance, eliminate threats before they could strike. It was supposed to be routine, but nothing about Afghanistan was routine. They climbed into position as the sun burned low, painting the horizon in blood and gold. Isabella settled into her perch, scanning the village through her scope. The streets looked empty, but she knew better. Too empty. The silence of anticipation. Through the comms, the team leader's voice crackled. Eagle 1, eyes up. Entry in 5. She exhaled steady, her cheek pressed against the stock. Movement flickered at the edge of a rooftop. She adjusted, focused. A man, rifle in hand. She fired once. Clean, silent, he dropped. Another moved from shadow to shadow, positioning for an ambush. Isabella squeezed. Another body crumpled into the dust. The team advanced. Step by step, their boots pounded the earth. Then she saw it, a figure in the doorway of a crumbling house. Taller, broader, the stance commanding, the insurgent leader. She centered him in her crosshairs. Her finger tightened. And then something. A child appeared at his side. A girl, maybe 7, clutching his sleeve with wide, terrified eyes. Isabella froze. The man shouted orders, gesturing toward hidden fighters. The girl clung. Her breath caught. The shot was clear, the target unmistakable. If she fired, the war shifted. The mission succeeded, but the child. Her pulse thundered. She heard Private's words echoing in her head, untouchable. If you're watching, nothing can get through. But she wasn't untouchable. She was human. And in this moment, humanity meant hesitation. Seconds stretched like hours. Her finger trembled against the trigger. She thought of her grandfather's words, respect the shot. Respect what it means. Respect, but what did respect look like now? Pulling the trigger, or holding it? Through the comms, voices rose, tense, urgent. Eagle 1, do you have the shot? Confirm target in your sights. Her lips parted, but no words came. Sweat stung her eyes. Her chest ached. Then suddenly, chaos. Fighters poured from alleys, weapons raised. The team scrambled for cover, shouts erupting in panic. Isabella tore her eyes from the doorway and fired, dropping one, then another, her instincts overriding hesitation. The world became dust and gunfire, every shot a prayer, every kill a delay against disaster. By the time silence fell, by the time the last echo faded into the mountains, the insurgent leader was gone. The doorway was empty, the girl too. The mission was over, but not in triumph. Back at base, the debrief was sharp, voices clipped. The commander's eyes burned into hers. You had him, you had the shot. Why didn't you take it? Isabella stared at the table, the wood with years of fists and pens. She didn't answer. She couldn't explain what it meant to see a child standing in the crosshairs, to feel her humanity collide with duty. The room buzzed with disappointment. Words like hesitation, failure, compromise floated heavy in the air. She left without defending herself. That night she sat alone, her rifle untouched, the compass heavy in her palm. She whispered into the dark, the words breaking from her chest. I couldn't kill her to kill him. And in the silence that followed, she felt the fracture widen. The myth had slipped. The record holder, the legend, the untouchable, she had hesitated. She had chosen the child over the mission, and though no one said it aloud, she could feel it in the air. The respect, fragile as glass, had cracked. She thought of his wide eyes and his belief. She thought of the wounded soldier who whispered, I thought you'd stop them all. And for the first time since sniper school, Isabella wondered if maybe the myth had been built on something she could never truly carry. She wasn't a legend, she was just a soldier, a woman, human. And maybe that was her greatest strength. Or maybe it would be the thing that broke her completely. What happens when the silence of others is louder than their words? Isabella learned quickly that the most cutting judgment didn't always come from accusations. Sometimes it came from the way people avoided your eyes, from the heavy pauses in conversations, from the looks that lingered too long and then slipped away. After the failed mission, the base seemed to hum differently around her. Soldiers who had once approached with awe now kept their distance. The young private with wide-eyed belief no longer sat near her at meals. He didn't sneer, he didn't mock. He simply shifted his tray elsewhere as if space itself had grown between them. No one had to say it aloud. She knew what they were thinking. She had the shot. She hadn't taken it. The insurgent leader had escaped. In her bunk at night, Isabella lay awake, listening to the low murmur of voices, the shuffle of boots in the hall. She touched the compass against her chest, the steady needle pressing through fabric. Respect the shot. Respect what it means. But what had it meant this time? Had she chosen wrong? She had saved the girl, yes, but at what cost? The commander's words still burned in her ears. Your hesitation compromised the mission. The word compromised was poison. In the military, compromise was betrayal dressed in softer clothing. Days passed. Missions continued. Isabella moved with her unit, quiet, precise, professional. She hit targets cleanly, provided overwatch without error. But no matter how sharp her aim, no matter how reliable her calculations, she felt the shadow of that moment following her. One evening she found herself on the roof of the base, staring out across the barren hills as the sun bled red into the horizon. The wind tugged at her hair, dry and relentless. Sergeant, an older soldier with a scar running down his cheek, climbed up beside her. He carried no weapon, only a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood there watching the desert sink into night. Finally he said, I heard about the girl. Isabella stiffened. She braced for judgment, for the sharp edge of disappointment, but's tone was not accusing. It was tired, heavy. He exhaled smoke, the curl of it drifting skyward. You did what half the guys here couldn't have. You hesitated, you saw a kid. She glanced at him, searching his lined face for mockery. There was none, only weariness. Flicked ash into the wind. They'll tell you hesitation is weakness. They'll tell you you failed. But the truth, you proved you're still human. Don't lose that, because once you do, you don't get it back. His words sank deep, unexpected. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt the edge of her chest loosen. But being human didn't erase consequences. A week later, they were sent into the mountains. Intelligence suggested an ambush was being staged along a supply route. Isabella climbed with her unit through jagged stone, the air thin and sharp. Her rifle dug into her shoulder, her boots slipping on loose gravel. As they reached their overwatch point, the world unfolded in silence, vast valleys stretching endless, shadows crawling as the sun dipped low. Isabella set up her rifle, scanning the ridges. Her breath steadied, her mind slipped into rhythm. Then a voice crackled through comms. Eagle One, do you have eyes? Her chest tightened. The boy still trusted her, but the trust had dulled. His tone carried uncertainty, as if asking not just for a report, but for reassurance she could still be who he believed she was. She swallowed hard, eyes on, clear for now. Minutes dragged, then movement, figures slipping through rocks, positioning. The ambush was real. Isabella tracked, calling coordinates, her voice sharp, clipped, unflinching. When the fight erupted, it was chaos. Gunfire split the air, dust rose like smoke, men shouted over comms. Isabella fired precise, dropping threats before they could flank her team. Her body moved faster than thought, her rifle an extension of her bones. Then she saw him, the insurgent leader, the same man from the village. His stance was unmistakable, his voice carrying commands even over the gunfire. Her breath hitched, she had him again. But this time no child stood at his side, only fighters, weapons raised. Her finger curled on the trigger, she exhaled and fired. The shot cracked across the valley. The leader fell, his body folding into the dust. Silence rippled through her unit's comms, then erupted in shouts of triumph. Target down, confirmed kill. Relief surged through her team, their voices bright, desperate, victorious. But Isabella, she felt nothing. No surge, no triumph, only emptiness. Because it hadn't erased the hesitation. It hadn't undone the choice in the village. It hadn't answered the question of whether she had been wrong or right. It had only proven one thing: she was still the sniper they believed in. That night back at base approached her again. His voice was softer now, tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "You got him this time." She looked at him. The boyish belief had dimmed, replaced by something heavier, not awe but understanding. He wasn't asking for legends anymore. He was asking for truth. But Isabella didn't know if she could give it. She nodded once, her voice quiet. "Yeah, I got him." When walked away, Isabella sat alone with her rifle. She ran a cloth down its barrel, her movements mechanical. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the metal, tired eyes, hard lines. She whispered to herself, to the silence, to the compass pressed against her chest. "You can't erase it. You just keep moving." And maybe that was strength. Not perfection, not legend, not untouchable myth. Just moving even when the weight tried to anchor you in place. But deep down, she wondered, how many more steps could she take before the weight finally broke her apart? How do you measure the cost of silence? Not the silence of the battlefield, when the gunfire dies and the air tastes of dust and cordite. Not the silence of night, when exhaustion pulls at your bones. But the silence inside, the one that grows louder with every unspoken thought, every regret you can't lay down. Isabella carried that silence everywhere now. It followed her into the chow hall, into the barracks, into the restless hours before dawn when she lay awake, staring at the metal ribs of the ceiling above her cot. It pressed against her chest with the weight of everything she couldn't say. And yet the war did not pause for her silence. Orders came. Missions stacked one on top of the other. She moved like a machine, precise, relentless, her body obeying even when her spirit faltered. Then came the mission that would test her more than any before. It was late autumn in the mountains, the air thin and sharp enough to bite. Intelligence reports spoke of an enemy compound, a command hub tucked into a village that clung stubbornly to the side of a cliff. Inside, they said, was not just another leader, but the architect of countless attacks, the one whose orders had claimed convoys, outposts, and too many American lives. The objective was simple on paper: eliminate him. The reality was anything but. The compound was buried within civilian structures, narrow alleys tangled like veins, families living under roofs that doubled as firing positions. Isabella's team was tasked with overwatch, protect the entry, provide precision fire, end the threat. She climbed with them through darkness, her breath clouding in the cold, her rifle digging into her shoulder. When they reached their perch, the village below lay in stillness, its lights faint and scattered, the mountains cradling it like stone giants. She set up her position, scanning rooftops, windows, doorways. Her scope swept over women hauling water, children chasing each other through dust, men smoking outside low doorways. Life threaded into the same alleys where death hid. Through comms, the commander's voice was crisp. "Target expected inside compound. Eagle 1, you're green to engage if he appears." She acknowledged, her voice steady though her chest felt tight. Hours passed, the village stirred awake, smoke from fires drifted skyward, and then movement, a figure stepping onto a balcony, broad shoulders commanding stance, the telltale radio pressed to his ear. The target. Isabella locked onto him. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat sinking with the familiar rhythm. The shot was clear. She had him. Then, like a cruel echo, a child appeared. A boy this time, maybe 10, carrying a bundle of wood, stepping onto the same balcony with careless innocence. Her chest clenched, the crosshairs bisected them both. Voices filled her headset. "Eagle 1, do you have eyes? Confirm target." She swallowed hard, her finger tightened. She could end it now, end the architect, save lives, stop future attacks. But the boy. The memory of the girl in the village slammed back into her. The hesitation, the judgment, the commander's disappointment, dimmed belief. Could she hesitate again? Her hand trembled against the trigger. The voices pressed harder. "Eagle One, do you have the shot? Take the shot." Her breath quickened. The boy set down his bundle, rubbing his eyes, unaware of the crosshairs that held his fate. The target turned, speaking into his radio, oblivious to the death waiting just beyond the ridge. Isabella's vision blurred with unshed tears. She could feel her humanity and her duty pulling in opposite directions, threatening to tear her apart. And then an explosion ripped through the far end of the village. Not from her rifle, from the ground. Enemy fighters, the ambush had begun. Chaos erupted. Shouts cracked through comms. Gunfire tore the night. Isabella snapped back, shifting her aim, dropping threats as they poured into the alleys. The boy vanished from the balcony, the target pulled inside by bodyguards. Her chance was gone. For hours the fight raged. Isabella's rifle barked again and again, her body locked in the rhythm of survival. She dropped enemies from rooftops, cut down ambushers as they flanked her team. Her precision kept men alive, but the target escaped. Again. When dawn broke, the village smoldered. The cost was high. 2 soldiers carried out on stretchers, a dozen civilians wounded, some killed in the crossfire. Back at base, the commander's face was stone. "You had him again. Why didn't you fire?" Her throat tightened. There was a boy. His jaw clenched. "There's always something, a shadow, a hesitation. Do you know how many lives his escape will cost us?" She wanted to shout that she knew, that she carried those lives already, heavy as the rifle on her back, but her voice failed. The meeting ended in silence. That night she sat alone outside the barracks, the cold biting through her uniform. She clutched the compass in her palm, her breath fogging in the dark. Her mind replayed the balcony, the boy's small frame, the target's oblivious stance. Over and over the moment looped, as if punishing her. Approached quietly, his steps hesitant. He didn't sit at first, just lingered. Then finally he lowered himself beside her. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "We lost good men today." Her chest ached. She whispered, "I know." He turned, his eyes heavy, older now. "But we lost more if you stopped being human." She looked at him, startled. Continued, his voice low, steady. "Everyone talks about the record, about the shot, about the myth, but the truth, what makes you different isn't that you can shoot farther than anyone else. It's that you see things the rest of us don't. You see the people, even when it hurts." Isabella's throat closed. For weeks she had carried the weight of failure, of hesitation, of judgment. And here was the boy who once worshipped the myth, telling her that maybe, just maybe, the hesitation was the point. She pressed the compass into her palm, the needle unwavering. For the first time she felt a flicker of something, not quite pride, not quite relief, something like acceptance. Because maybe being human was not her weakness, maybe it was her strength. But deep inside she knew the war wasn't done testing her. The cost would rise again. And the silence she carried would demand more than she had ever given. What do you leave behind when the war is over? Not medals, not headlines, not even records etched into books that few will ever read. What you leave behind is quieter, harder to measure, and sometimes invisible. Isabella thought about that on the morning of her last mission. The air was thin, the mountains sharp against a pale sky. Her unit was being sent into one of the most dangerous valleys in Afghanistan, a place so with ambushes that soldiers called it the throat. Narrow, steep, unforgiving. Once you entered, there was no way out except forward. Intelligence was clear. An enemy commander was moving supplies through the pass. If they cut him off, they could disrupt months of planned attacks. If they failed, those supplies would fuel bloodshed across the region. It was high risk. Everyone knew it. And yet, Isabella felt an unusual calm as she adjusted her gear, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. She had stopped expecting the myth to protect her, stopped hoping the record would shield her. She had learned painfully that the war didn't care about history. The only thing that mattered was the breath you took, the decision you made, the person beside you who lived or died depending on both. As they climbed into position, walked near her. His face was harder now, carved by months of dust and fire, but his eyes still carried the flicker of belief. Not blind belief, not myth, something deeper. "You ready?" he asked softly. Isabella glanced at him, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "As I'll ever be." They reached their perch above the valley, the convoy of enemies moving like ants below. Trucks loaded with crates, fighters flanking on ridges, the enemy commander riding in the lead. Isabella settled her rifle, her cheek pressed against the stock, her breathing slowing into rhythm. The distance wasn't 4,020 yards, it wasn't record-breaking, but it was still a shot that mattered. Through her scope she studied the commander. He barked orders, his hand raised, his rifle slung, a clear target. Her finger curled against the trigger. And then movement, civilians. A small group of villagers forced ahead of the convoy as human shields, their faces hollow, their steps unsteady. Among them a child stumbled, a girl. Isabella's chest tightened, again, always again. The crosshairs trembled over the commander's frame. She could fire now, end him, but risk the lives forced to walk near him. Her breath caught. She heard the commander in her headset, his voice urgent. "Eagle One, do you have the shot? Take it now." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She thought of her grandfather, of her mother's voice, of quiet words, "Don't lose your humanity." She exhaled, steady. Her mind raced through calculations, wind, drop, movement. But her heart whispered the truth. She could not take this shot, not like this. "Negative," she whispered into the comms. "Civilians in the crossfire." There was silence, heavy, then anger. "That's the target. We won't get another chance." Isabella ignored it. She shifted her sights, scanning the ridges, the flanks. And then she saw it, a fighter on the high ground, preparing an RPG to fire on her unit below. Without hesitation, she fired. The man dropped. Another appeared. She shifted, fired, moved again. Her shots came fast, precise, saving her unit inch by inch as the valley erupted in chaos. Bullets ripped the air, dust clouded the ground, men shouted over the roar. Isabella moved like stone and breath, her rifle an extension of her soul. Through it all, the convoy broke. Trucks scattered, fighters retreating under the relentless fire. The commander fled into the mountains, his victory but his life intact. When the last echo died, the valley lay but silent. Her unit had survived. Not untouched, some wounded, some broken, but alive. Back at base, the commander's face was a storm. "You had him, and again you let him go." Isabella stood steady, her voice calm, her green eyes unwavering. "Sir, I saved who I could. That was the mission." He stared at her, his jaw tight. Then he dismissed her with a wave, frustration radiating off him. But outside caught up with her. His voice was low, reverent. "You saved us, that's what matters." She looked at him, searching his eyes, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected, not disappointment, not awe, just respect, quiet, steady, the kind you don't win with records but with truth. That night Isabella sat alone with her compass under a sky thick with stars. The needle pointed north, steady, faithful. She turned it in her palm, thinking of the path that had brought her here, the laughter of sniper school, the shot heard across Fort Benning, the hesitation, the failures, the choices. She realized something then. The myth would live on, whether she wanted it or not. The story of 4,020 yards would be told in training halls, whispered to new recruits, etched into record books. But her real legacy wasn't that bullet. It was every life saved in silence, every child spared in hesitation, every soldier who came home because she chose humanity over myth. She closed her eyes, letting the night wrap around her. For once, the silence inside felt lighter, not empty, not crushing, just quiet. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it doesn't boast, it doesn't need to. Sometimes dignity simply acts.